Hello, people from around the universe! I am your host, the Italian Ace, and welcome back to another fairy tale video. Except this one is not covering the 100 Years Quest. Instead, today we're talking about the one and only Natsu Dragneel, and more specifically, what makes him such a fantastic example of the Shonen Protagonist. I hope you're excited. This is a new series I've been thinking of doing, and where I do some character analysis, and if you like this, then do let me know in the comments below. But of course, before we get into any of that, cue my intro. So, Natsu Dragneel. What exactly is so special about this man? Well, for one, he has a very interesting hairstyle with quite a unique hair color as well. What? Every anime character has that? No. Come on, there's... Huh. Never mind then. Okay, seriously. Let's talk about what makes Natsu work so well as a shonen protagonist. First, it might be a good idea to define just what exactly makes a shonen protagonist. More specifically, the classic one that we are going to be discussing today. Well, for one, they are almost always good-natured. 2, they put their friends first. And 3, they're usually not the smartest people out there, but they do have quite the innate battling / fighting or whatever competitive thing they're into tactical sense. I say whatever competitive thing they're into because shonen isn't just limited to battling stuff. There's sports, animes, and manga. There's competitive games like the Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh franchises. There's competitive cooking like Food Wars. Really, anything you can think of, and there's probably some kind of a shonen genre associated with it. But alright, we've defined what I believe to be the 3 main characteristics that basically all of your classic shonen protagonists share. So let's talk about how Natsu excels in all of them and even takes a couple of them to the next level. Starting off with the first trait that we defined, and that is being good-natured. I put this one first because it's honestly the least interesting one, in my opinion, because it can be summed up pretty simply by saying they're good people that want to protect both the world and anyone they care about, and they try to stop evil things from happening. I mean, it's pretty basic, but that's what it is. Of course, Natsu is a very clear example of this, as he's battled against evil wizards, guilds, demons, dragons, dragon slayers, really anything you can think of in the fairy tale universe, because at the end of the day, he's a good guy. I don't know why I said at the end of the day, as in only when you really think about it. It's pretty obvious he's a good guy. That comment made no sense, but let's just move on to the next one, alright? So the second trait I brought up is the one where the shonen protagonist always puts his friends first, even before themselves all of the time. However, I think this one is the most interesting, specifically for Natsu, so I'm gonna save this one for last, also just to keep you on your toes a little bit. Don't worry though, the third trait is also very interesting to talk about because there's a lot that sets Natsu apart in this category from his other shonen protagonist counterparts. In case you forgot, that trait is being a little bit on the not super intelligent side, but still having a good innate sense or instinct, if you will, of what strategies will work in battle for Natsu's case, or again, any competitive endeavor that protagonist may be taking a part in. So starting off with Natsu not being the smartest, and for the most part this is true. I mean, you can just look back to some of the things that he's done throughout the series, like when Erza was captured by the Magic Council at the very beginning and he goes dressed up as her, saying that he's Erza Scarlet, just so he can be captured instead of her. But then not even realizing that she was only there as a scapegoat so the Magic Council didn't have to look bad by not punishing Fairy Tail for the destruction that they had. it was just a classic Natsu / any anime protagonist moment where they're like, yes, I will do this thing that makes zero sense to anyone else, but in my mind has no possible way of failing. Brilliant. He's also used multiple times the classic phrase of, well, I don't really know what's going on here. This is all a bit too complicated for me to follow, but I'll just go ahead and fight the bad guy because that's what I do. Okay, maybe he didn't say it exactly that way, but basically, yeah, that's the gist of it, and it's happened definitely more than just a couple times throughout the series. However, what's interesting with Natsu is that he does have those moments where when he gets serious, he really can start to think quite clearly and come up with pretty decent plans, especially on the fly. So it's interesting because, well, yes, this is something that a lot of other shonen protagonists also do. I think he kind of does it even more and better than most of them. What I mean by this is that when Natsu really has his back against the wall, he can come up with some very creative ways of getting out of whatever situation he's in that is currently putting either him or someone he cares about in danger. Sure, a lot of them may not be the most complex strategies ever. I mean, I don't think Natsu's going to be coming up with the same type of strategy that someone like Erza would, for example. But at the same time, they're not stupid either. Like, they're very well thought out, and just because they're simple, it doesn't mean that they're not also ingenious. A great example of this is actually something that I mentioned in my second video reviewing the 100 Years Quest. And I will try not to go into any spoilers here, but there might be some minor ones, so just be warned. And again, I'll try to keep them to the absolute minimum. And what happens in this example is that Natsu is taking on an antagonist that can read people's minds and basically manifest whatever they think is the most terrifying or strongest magic user. And Natsu is able to use this to his advantage, basically causing this particular antagonist to stop using this ability, otherwise he's going to self-destruct. Now, from that description, I'm sure a lot of you probably can guess just who Natsu thought of to outsmart this opponent. I'm not going to say it, just in case it's something that is not as obvious as I think it is, because, I mean, I read it, so to me it's obvious, but maybe if someone hasn't read this, it's not. But just so you know, Natsu beats this particular foe by using his brain and not brute force. And that's the whole point that I wanted to make, is that Natsu does have those moments where he can outsmart his opponent instead of just outmuscle them. Although don't worry, Natsu does have a lot of outmuscling moments in there as well, which we will talk about in the final point a lot more, as they're kind of intrinsic with that whole putting your friends first thing. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's go back and talk just a bit more about Natsu's ability to kind of gauge a battle and follow the best course of action that he can think of. In fact, I'd like to bring up an example where Natsu is able to combine both his tactical prowess, however inconsistent it may be, with his ingenuity to great effect, and is able to then beat a much stronger opponent, at least at the time, because of this. This actually happens multiple times in the series, but there's one in particular that I'd like to focus on, and it's the first instance of this happening as far as I can remember, and that is when Jalal and Natsu are fighting in the Tower of Heaven arc. So at that point in the series, Jalal is objectively much stronger than Natsu, without any buffs, and so Natsu can't really compete one-on-one yet. However, Natsu gets the idea to pick up one of the lacrima pieces on the ground that had been absorbing so much energy and just start eating it. Like, very simply, just start eating the lacrima. This, when I first saw it, was insane. Because, of course, we knew Dragon Slayers can eat their own element, but now Natsu's basically consuming pure energy, plus whatever lacrimas are also made of. I'm guessing glass, I don't really know, so probably not pleasant to eat anyway. And he's using this to really power himself up. Like, he goes crazy after this. I mean, it's a really hype moment for one, but for two, it's just insane how much of a buff he gets, especially since it's not his element. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because who else, except for Natsu, would have thought of just consuming something that's not normally consumed by anyone, even Dragon Slayers? And yet it works. It works better than anyone could have predicted, probably even Natsu himself, and it's all because of his own curiosity to try something that has a chance of working, but could also horribly backfire. Because yes, if you don't remember, when this was happening, Erza was basically telling him that he's crazy, his body may not be able to handle that, and he shouldn't try to go for something so reckless. But Natsu, at that point, doesn't really care. And why doesn't he care, you ask? Well, because one of his friends' lives is in danger, and so it doesn't matter if he has to risk his own life to save that friend. See? I brought it all the way back to the second point. Now we have a very nice, smooth transition into what I think is the most defining trait of Natsu Dragneel. So yes, we're finally here talking about how Natsu will put his friends first before anyone else. Also, by friends, I mean anyone he cares about. They could be related to him in some other way. As long as there's someone that's meaningful to him, he's gonna do this. So I hope we're all on the same page there. But I think we can start off right with that example that we were just discussing and talk about it from the perspective of Natsu really not caring about what happens to him as long as he can protect everyone he cares about. I mean, in fact, in that arc, if Natsu's not there, Erza just dies because Jalal tries to sacrifice her to the Ethereum cannon so he can then accumulate all that magic and use it for his plan. But Natsu is basically just like, no. I'm gonna save Erza, even though this might also put my life in great danger. Doesn't matter. I can't let my friend die. We're doing this. And that's just the kind of character Natsu is, but that's not something that's exclusive to him. Again, a lot of shonen protagonists share this trait, but none of them push it quite so far and to such a satisfying effect as Natsu does. Or at least not most of them. Maybe there are some, because I haven't watched every single piece of shonen manga or anime out there. But out of the ones that I know, Natsu is definitely the best example. So, it's interesting, because basically everyone in Fairy Tail, to some extent, shares this trait of putting the guild specifically, but also anyone they care about, before themselves. Again, this may differ from character to character in terms of just how far they'll go for someone else, but you can definitely tell that all of them have this kind of common mentality, which makes sense because it's a big theme in the show. I mean, the guild is their family, and part of the reason that we love Fairy Tail, at least part of the reason I love Fairy Tail, is because of the strong bonds that the characters share with each other. Still, when it comes to Natsu specifically, he does get this kind of extra surplus charge when he's fighting for his friends. Really? There's only one other character I can think of who gets this much of a power-up when fighting for her friends, and that is the other person whose poster I have, Erza. And even then, you could definitely make the argument that Natsu still has more of a distinct power-up when fighting for someone he cares about. Also, this is not an Erza video, so let's go back to our main boy, Natsu. I mean, I could bring up countless examples of him getting exponentially stronger when someone else's life is at stake, but it will get kind of redundant after I do it for the second or third time, or 20th, and I'm just like, oh yes, there's this battle, and Natsu gets way stronger than he was normally because one of his friends is in danger. And that would also make it sound like it's just a very monotone, repetitive thing where it's like, oh, it's the same thing over and over and it never changes and it's just, oh, look, it's the same battle. when that's not really the case. So instead, I'm gonna bring up probably one other example and then just kind of talk about this as a whole. And you know what? Since we're bringing up one final example, might as well make it from the final battle in the original Fairy Tail series. And that is the battle against Aknologia. For anyone who doesn't remember, which I think most of you will if you've seen the show, but just in case, maybe it's been a couple years since you watched this episode or whatever. When all of the Dragon Slayers go to fight Aknologia, they're already pretty beaten down. I mean, the battle with the Alber's Empire has been raging on for a while now. Natsu faced Zeref at one point. Everyone has gone through hell and back, realistically. And so to fight someone as strong as Aknologia, it's not really easy in the best of circumstances. And these are anything but the best of circumstances. Still, someone has to do it. And of course, it has to be a Dragon Slayer. And again, of course, it's gonna be Natsu. One, because he's the protagonist, but two, because it really does seem like when his friends' lives are at stake, he can just keep drawing on this well of energy that will not fully run out until he wants it to. I don't know if wants it to is the right way to say that. Maybe until he doesn't think he needs it anymore is a better way to phrase it, but you get the idea. Now, yes, the only way he's actually able to defeat Aknologia is by taking all of the powers from the other Dragon Slayers by consuming their elements and then using them himself to kind of just smack Aknologia out of there. But he still has to get the energy to do this in the first place, and no one else really seems to be able to perform this. Which also kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the second point, or the third from the video's beginning. The one where he has good battle instincts. Natsu seems to be the only Dragon Slayer who consistently consumes an element that is not his own, while still being able to actually make good use of it. I mean, it's interesting because we know that he's not the only Dragon Slayer who can do this. Gajeel, for example, can use Shadow Dragon Slaying magic, just like Natsu can use Lightning Dragon Slaying magic as well, combined with their normal element, not just on its own, but still. But even then, it's not like anyone else was even offering to do this. And again, you could say, oh, well, Natsu's the protagonist and they all thought it would be more meaningful if he did it or whatever. But in terms of the actual story's canon, I do firmly believe that Natsu is the only one who can kind of will his body to take any stress whatsoever if it means saving his friends. Because for anyone who doesn't remember, especially the first time that he consumes a new element, it's not exactly a picnic. I mean, it's a pretty arduous task, and it takes a lot of energy and willpower to complete it. But again, that doesn't seem to matter to Natsu when someone he cares about is in danger. I mean, I think literally Natsu could have all of his bones broken and 0 stamina left, but he would still get up and fight and get a surplus of energy from somewhere if it meant saving someone's life. And I think that's the key difference between him and some of the other shonen protagonists. Because again, a lot of them will do crazy things for the people they care about and will put their lives on the line. However, Natsu doesn't just do that, he also seems to just get the so-called friendship boost, which is, again, prevalent in Fairy Tail, but to such a ridiculous degree that I just can't think of anyone else who has this to this extent. Personally, I love this because, again, Fairy Tail is all about the bonds that the people in the guild and the universe as a whole share with each other. And so your main character having powers that are intrinsically tied to said bonds not only makes a lot of sense, but is the most satisfying way to give him power-ups from a narrative perspective that I can think of. Anyway, I think I've rambled on long enough about one of my favorite characters not just in fairy tale, but in anime in general. So I'll end the video here, but I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully you either A, agree with me, or B, agree with me. Regardless, I do hope you enjoyed this. Do let me know what you think of this new type of video, and if you want to see more fairy tale content, not just about Natsu, but any fairy tale topic, then I do recommend subscribing, and I hope to see you all in the next video. But until then, remember to follow the way of the ace. See ya!